Most people don't actually want emotional mastery. They want justification. Justification to explode, to react, to blame, to say, "This is how I am," and avoid the uncomfortable responsibility of self-control. Modern culture quietly encourages this weakness by calling it authenticity, as if losing control is a virtue and restraint is repression. But both Stoicism and Eastern philosophy were brutally honest about one thing that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. No one has power over your emotional state unless you grant it to them. Every time you say, "They made me feel this way," you are confessing that you handed your inner authority to someone else without resistance. That is not sensitivity, that is surrender. Emotional mastery begins with a truth that feels offensive to the untrained mind. Your emotions are not reactions you are forced to have. They are responses you have not yet learned to choose. Between what happens to you and how you respond, there is always a space. That space is not philosophical poetry, it is neurological reality. It is the pause where awareness can interrupt impulse. And yet most people never enter that space. They react instantly because reaction feels natural, while restraint feels unnatural, effortful, and lonely. But discipline has always been lonely. The Stoics understood that peace is not something the world gives you, it is something you defend. Eastern wisdom understood that suffering is not caused by events, but by attachment to how we believe events should unfold. When these two traditions meet, they expose the same uncomfortable conclusion. Much of what people call emotional pain is self-generated through expectation. You expect people to be fair. You expect them to be considerate. You expect them to behave according to your moral framework. When they fail to do so, you call it betrayal, disrespect, or harm. But in truth, what hurts is not their behavior, it is the collision between your expectation and reality. Reality does not owe you emotional comfort. People are inconsistent, flawed, self-interested, unconscious, and often overwhelmed themselves. Expecting them to behave otherwise is not optimism. It is psychological negligence. The moment your peace depends on other people meeting your expectations, you have already lost control. You are no longer governing your inner world. You are negotiating it with forces you cannot command. Emotional mastery begins when you stop demanding that the world cooperate with your inner calm. This does not mean becoming indifferent or cold. It means becoming internally sovereign. Sovereignty is not numbness, it is clarity. It is the ability to experience emotion without being owned by it. One of the most common obstacles to this sovereignty is the need to be right. The ego would rather win an argument than preserve tranquility. It would rather feel superior than feel free. Most conflicts are not battles for truth, they are battles for identity. When someone disagrees with you, the ego hears a threat, not an idea, and so it reacts defensively, aggressively, emotionally. Stoicism asks a question that cuts through this illusion. Would you rather be right? Or would you rather be at peace? Very few people choose peace consistently, and then they wonder why they feel exhausted. Every argument costs energy, every emotional reaction drains attention, and attention is the most valuable resource the mind possesses. Calm is not passive, it is selective. You do not owe your emotional energy to every provocation. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not avoidance, it is mastery. Silence disrupts the emotional script. Anger feeds conflict because it gives the other person exactly what they want, reaction. Silence denies them that reward. This is why silence unsettles people who thrive on emotional chaos. Modern culture glorifies emotional expression as honesty, but unregulated expression is not honesty. It is leakage. True authenticity requires control. A person who cannot regulate their emotions is not real. They are reactive, and reactive people are easy to manipulate. This is why emotional discipline has always been associated with strength. When someone insults you and you feel wounded, the wound is not created by their words. Words are vibrations until you assign meaning to them. The meaning you assign reveals your inner state. If an insult collapses your self-worth, then your self-worth was already unstable. Marcus Aurelius observed that we are disturbed not by events, but by our judgments about them. Eastern philosophy repeats this endlessly. Suffering begins in the mind, not in the world. Emotional mastery requires building an internal reference point so solid that external noise loses its authority. This is where boundaries become essential. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. Without them, you absorb everything, other people's moods, stress, expectations, demands, until you are emotionally bankrupt. Saying no is not selfish, it is self-respect. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. And yet people who never protect their energy eventually become resentful, withdrawn, or bitter, then blame the world for it. Detachment from the opinions of others is not arrogance, it is psychological hygiene. Most opinions say more about the speaker than the subject. People project their insecurities outward and call it truth. Chasing approval is like chasing a horizon. It recedes the moment you move toward it. A life governed by external validation is a life permanently at risk. Freedom requires the courage to be misunderstood. Epictetus warned that if you want to improve, you must be willing to appear foolish in the eyes of those who measure life by shallow standards. Emotional mastery is choosing long-term peace over short-term validation. When provoked, anger feels powerful, but it is the most predictable response available. Silence, restraint, and awareness are far more disruptive. Gratitude, often dismissed as sentimental, is one of the most effective tools for emotional regulation because it redirects attention. You cannot be deeply grateful and deeply angry at the same time. Gratitude shifts perception from scarcity to presence. It does not deny hardship, it rebalances the mind. And perception determines emotion. Criticism, when stripped of ego, is simply information. Information can be useful or useless, but it does not need to become identity. Emotional mastery is extracting wisdom without absorbing poison. And finally, the highest form of emotional discipline is letting go. Holding on to resentment does not punish the offender, it imprisons you. Letting go is not forgiveness for their sake, it is liberation for yours. Stoicism and Eastern philosophy agree on this point without compromise. Freedom is internal. Nothing outside you can grant it, and nothing outside you can take it away, unless you allow it. Emotional mastery is not a destination. It is a daily discipline of choosing awareness over impulse, clarity over chaos, and sovereignty over surrender. The world will continue to provoke you. People will continue to disappoint you. Circumstances will remain unfair. The only question is whether you will continue handing them the keys to your inner life, or finally take them back. If emotional mastery is the ability to choose your response, then expectation is the silent thief that steals that ability before you even notice. Most people are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the story they tell about those events. A story fueled almost entirely by expectation. You expect respect, fairness, consistency, understanding, and reciprocity, then feel wounded when reality refuses to play its assigned role. Stoicism calls this a failure of judgment. Eastern wisdom calls it attachment. Modern psychology calls it cognitive distortion. They are all describing the same phenomenon from different angles. The mind constructs a preferred version of reality, then experiences suffering when the world deviates from that script. The suffering feels personal, but it is self-authored. Emotional mastery requires the courage to release the illusion that people should behave the way you would behave. They will not. They are shaped by different histories, pressures, insecurities, blind spots, and levels of awareness. Their behavior reflects their inner state, not your worth. The moment you stop expecting the world to mirror your values, you regain emotional leverage. Disappointment loses its sting when expectation dissolves. This does not mean tolerating harm or abandoning standards. It means removing the emotional dependency on outcomes you cannot control. Control is the axis around which emotional suffering rotates. You cannot control people, circumstances, or outcomes, but you can control the lens through which you interpret them. The Stoics were relentless about this distinction because they understood that confusing influence with control leads to inner collapse. Influence is persuasion, control is authority. You rarely have authority over the external world, but you always have authority over your judgments if you train it. Most people never train it. They outsource it to habit, impulse, and social conditioning. This is why they feel perpetually reactive. Another trap that undermines emotional sovereignty is the belief that expressing every feeling immediately is healthy. Modern culture celebrates emotional venting as catharsis, but unchecked venting often strengthens the very patterns it claims to release. Every time you react without reflection, you reinforce the neurological pathway that connects stimulus directly to emotion without awareness. Over time, this pathway becomes dominant. You become predictable to yourself and to others. Stoicism does not advocate suppression, it advocates examination. Eastern traditions do not advocate denial, they advocate observation. The difference matters. Suppression buries emotion, observation dissolves it. When you observe an emotion without immediately acting on it, you weaken its grip. You create distance between awareness and impulse. That distance is the foundation of freedom. Without it, emotion drives behavior. With it, emotion becomes information rather than command. Most people fear this pause because they mistake it for coldness. It is not coldness, it is clarity. Clarity feels unfamiliar to those addicted to emotional turbulence. Turbulence feels alive, calm feels empty at first. But emptiness is not absence, it is space. And space is where choice lives. The desire to always be understood is another subtle source of emotional fragility. People suffer deeply when they feel misinterpreted, unheard, or misjudged. But the need to be understood by everyone is a psychological burden no human can carry. You will be misunderstood, often, by people who lack context, depth, patience, or goodwill. If your peace depends on universal understanding, you have set an impossible condition for calm. Stoicism teaches indifference to unjust criticism not because criticism is harmless, but because it is uncontrollable. Eastern philosophy teaches non-attachment to reputation because reputation is unstable by nature. When you tie your inner state to how others perceive you, you place your emotional center outside yourself. Emotional mastery is the act of relocating that center inward. This requires building an internal compass strong enough to withstand external noise. That compass is not arrogance, it is alignment. Alignment means your values guide your behavior more than others' opinions do. Without alignment, you drift emotionally. With alignment, criticism loses power because it no longer defines direction. Boundaries play a crucial role in maintaining this alignment. Boundaries are often misunderstood as barriers erected against others, but in truth they are structures erected for yourself. They define where your responsibility ends and where another person's begins. Without boundaries, you assume responsibility for emotions, problems, and expectations that are not yours. This leads to resentment, exhaustion, and emotional confusion. Saying no is an act of precision. It clarifies reality. It prevents emotional leakage. A person who cannot say no eventually says it through burnout, withdrawal, or bitterness. Emotional mastery favors honesty early over resentment later. Detachment from the opinions of others is not disengagement from humanity. It is engagement without entanglement. You can listen without absorbing. You can consider without internalizing. You can respect without surrendering authority over your inner life. Most opinions are not evaluations of you. They are expressions of the speaker's internal landscape. When you understand this, you stop personalizing what was never about you. The ancient Stoics warned that seeking approval makes you a servant to the crowd. Eastern sages warned that attachment to praise is attachment to suffering. Both recognized that external validation is volatile. It rises and falls with mood, trend, and circumstance. Building your self-worth on it is like building a house on sand. Emotional mastery requires grounding worth in something stable: integrity, intention, effort, and awareness. When provoked, the instinct to respond with anger feels justified, even righteous. Anger promises protection, but it rarely delivers it. It escalates conflict, clouds judgment, and leaves residue long after the moment passes. Silence, by contrast, preserves energy. Silence is not passivity when chosen consciously, it is strategy. It denies the provocation its desired effect. It creates asymmetry. The person seeking reaction is left confronting their own behavior without reinforcement. This is deeply unsettling for those who feed on emotional exchange. Silence does not mean never speaking, it means speaking selectively. Speak when your words clarify, de-escalate, or improve the situation. Otherwise, let restraint do the work. Gratitude operates on a different axis. It is not about positivity, it is about perspective. The brain cannot maintain high levels of anger and gratitude simultaneously because they activate opposing neural networks. Gratitude grounds attention in sufficiency rather than lack. It does not erase problems, it reduces their psychological dominance. In moments of emotional volatility, gratitude recenters the mind. It reminds you that not everything is under threat. Criticism, when approached without ego, becomes a diagnostic tool. It reveals blind spots or confirms resilience. If it contains truth, use it. If it contains malice, discard it. The key is non-identification. Information does not need to become identity. Emotional mastery lies in extracting value without absorbing damage. Letting go is the final and most misunderstood discipline. People cling to resentment believing it preserves justice. But resentment preserves only pain. It binds your present to a past you cannot change. Letting go does not absolve wrongdoing. It releases you from its ongoing psychological cost. It is not forgetting, it is unburdening. Stoicism frames this as focusing on what is within your control. Eastern philosophy frames it as releasing attachment. Both converge on the same truth. Peace requires relinquishment. You cannot carry every injury forward and remain free. Emotional mastery is not a single realization but a practice repeated daily. Awareness over impulse, choice over reaction, clarity over chaos, sovereignty over surrender. The world will continue to test you because that is the nature of existence. People will disappoint you because they are human. Circumstances will remain imperfect because perfection is an illusion. Mastery is not the absence of disturbance, it is the ability to remain steady within it. If expectation steals emotional control, then identity quietly cements its loss. Most people believe they are reacting to situations, but in reality they are defending an image of who they think they are supposed to be. The ego does not suffer because of pain, it suffers because pain threatens its narrative. This is why criticism feels unbearable, why disrespect feels intolerable, and why disagreement feels personal. The mind confuses information with identity. Stoicism dismantles this confusion by separating the self from its roles, labels, and reputations. Eastern wisdom dissolves it further by pointing out that the self you are defending is already a construction. When you defend an illusion, every challenge feels like an attack. Emotional mastery requires loosening the grip on identity so that events can occur without being interpreted as existential threats. The more tightly you cling to a fixed self-image, the more fragile you become. Fragility is not sensitivity, it is over-identification. A rigid identity demands constant protection, and that protection costs emotional energy. This is why people who are deeply attached to being seen as intelligent, moral, successful, or good are often the most reactive. They are not defending truth, they are defending status. Status anxiety is one of the most powerful emotional triggers in modern society. Social comparison, amplified by constant exposure to curated lives, creates a perpetual sense of inadequacy. When your worth is measured externally, your emotional state becomes volatile. Stoicism counters this by relocating worth to virtue and intention rather than outcome or recognition. Eastern philosophy counters it by questioning the very notion of permanent worth. If nothing is fixed, nothing needs defending. When identity softens, emotions stabilize. Another dimension of emotional mastery lies in understanding the role of habit. Reactions are not spontaneous, they are trained. Every time you react impulsively, you strengthen a pattern. Over time, that pattern becomes automatic. People often say, "That's just how I am," without realizing they are describing a habit, not a destiny. The nervous system learns through repetition. Anger, defensiveness, avoidance, and rumination are not traits, they are rehearsed responses. Emotional mastery requires interrupting rehearsal. This interruption feels uncomfortable because the body craves familiarity. Even when familiarity is painful, calm feels foreign to those accustomed to chaos. Stillness feels empty to those addicted to stimulation. But discomfort during transition is not evidence of error, it is evidence of change. Both Stoicism and Eastern practice emphasize training rather than insight alone. Insight without practice fades. Practice without insight becomes rigid. Together, they form discipline. Discipline is not force, it is consistency. Small, repeated acts of awareness rewire emotional response over time. This is why mastery cannot be rushed. It is cultivated. Another illusion that undermines emotional control is the belief that fairness governs life. People expect outcomes to align with effort, virtue, or intention. When this does not occur, resentment arises. Stoicism dismantles this expectation by reminding us that the universe is indifferent. Eastern wisdom echoes this through the principle of non-attachment to outcomes. Fairness is a human concept imposed on an impersonal reality. Expecting life to reward you proportionally is a subtle form of entitlement. Letting go of this expectation does not make you passive, it makes you resilient. You still act, strive, and contribute, but without the emotional debt of expecting a specific return. Emotional freedom increases when action is decoupled from entitlement. Another powerful practice is reframing adversity as training rather than injustice. Stoics viewed difficulty as a gym for the soul. Eastern traditions viewed suffering as a teacher. This does not romanticize pain, it contextualizes it. When adversity is framed as an obstacle, it breeds resistance. When framed as training, it builds capacity. Resistance amplifies suffering. Acceptance reduces it. Acceptance is not approval, it is clarity. You can oppose something without being consumed by it. This distinction is critical. Emotional mastery allows you to respond effectively without internal chaos. Anger narrows perception. Fear accelerates judgment. Calm expands awareness. In expanded awareness, better decisions emerge. This is why emotional regulation is not merely about feeling better, it is about seeing more clearly. Clarity is power. A calm mind perceives nuance. It recognizes options invisible to a reactive mind. The ability to pause is the ability to choose. Choice is the foundation of freedom. Another overlooked aspect of mastery is compassion without attachment. Compassion does not require emotional entanglement. You can care without carrying. Many people exhaust themselves by internalizing others' pain, believing this is empathy. It is not. It is emotional fusion. True compassion involves presence without absorption. Stoicism teaches benevolence without dependence. Eastern wisdom teaches loving kindness without clinging. When you learn to witness suffering without becoming it, your capacity to help increases. Burnout decreases. Emotional mastery is sustainable care. Sustainability is the difference between a brief surge of empathy and a lifetime of service. The modern tendency to equate intensity with sincerity undermines this. Intensity feels real, but it is often unstable. Depth is quiet. Depth endures. Calm concern outlasts emotional spikes. Another common source of emotional instability is rumination. The mind replays events not to solve them but to re-experience the associated emotion. Rumination is not thinking, it is emotional looping. Stoicism interrupts this by directing attention to what is within control. Eastern practice interrupts it by returning awareness to the present moment. Both cut the loop. The present is neutral. It contains less narrative. When attention returns to the present, emotion loses fuel. This is not escapism, it is grounding. Emotional mastery requires recognizing when the mind is feeding itself distress under the illusion of analysis. Analysis that produces no action is indulgence. Awareness that produces calm is discipline. Letting go of rumination frees mental energy. That energy can then be invested in intention rather than reaction. Over time, this reallocation changes the emotional baseline. You become less volatile, not because life is easier, but because you are clearer. Another uncomfortable truth is that many people are attached to their suffering. Suffering provides identity, justification, and attention. Letting go of it threatens these secondary gains. This is why emotional mastery can feel like loss. You lose the story of being wronged. You lose the comfort of blame. You lose the drama that once animated your inner life. In return, you gain quiet. Quiet can feel empty at first, but emptiness is space, and space allows something new to emerge. Peace is not exciting, it is stabilizing. Those accustomed to emotional extremes may initially resist it, but stability is what allows growth. Growth requires a steady foundation. Finally, emotional mastery converges on a single practice repeated endlessly: noticing. Noticing the moment before reaction. Noticing the thought before emotion. Noticing the story before belief. This noticing creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice creates freedom. Stoicism and Eastern wisdom agree on this without contradiction. Awareness is liberation, not knowledge, not control of others, not perfect circumstances, but awareness of one's own inner processes. Mastery is not domination, it is intimacy with oneself. The more intimately you understand your mind, the less power it has to surprise and overwhelm you. You stop being dragged by emotion and start moving with it. You stop fighting reality and start navigating it. The world remains uncertain. People remain unpredictable. Circumstances remain imperfect. Emotional mastery does not change these facts. It changes your relationship to them, and that change alters everything. If emotional mastery has a final frontier, it is the relationship you have with loss. Loss of control, loss of image, loss of certainty, loss of people, loss of imagined futures. Most emotional instability is not caused by what is happening, but by resistance to what has already happened. The mind clings to versions of reality that no longer exist, then suffers when forced to confront the present. Stoicism calls this clinging irrational. Eastern wisdom calls it ignorance. Both point to the same source of suffering: refusal to let go. Letting go is often misunderstood as weakness or surrender, but in truth it is the most disciplined act of emotional strength. To let go is to stop arguing with reality. You can disagree with what happened without being enslaved by it. You can acknowledge pain without allowing it to define you. Most people do not suffer because they feel pain. They suffer because they replay it endlessly, hoping for a different ending that will never arrive. Emotional mastery requires closing the loop. This does not mean suppressing memory, it means releasing attachment to outcome. The past cannot be negotiated with. Every attempt to do so drains energy from the present. The Stoics warned that living in regret is living in exile from oneself. Eastern traditions warn that clinging to the past binds you to illusion. The present moment is the only place where agency exists. When attention leaves it, agency dissolves. Loss also reveals another uncomfortable truth. Much of what people call love is attachment, and much of what they call loyalty is fear of absence. Attachment demands permanence in an impermanent world. When permanence fails, attachment transforms into suffering. Emotional mastery does not eliminate love, it purifies it. It removes the demand that others remain unchanged so that you can remain comfortable. This is not indifference, it is respect for reality. Loving without clinging allows connection without captivity. The mind resists this because attachment provides certainty. Certainty feels safe, but certainty is an illusion. The Stoics prepared for loss not because they were pessimistic, but because they understood the nature of existence. Eastern wisdom trained non-attachment not because it denied love, but because it recognized that clinging turns love into anxiety. Emotional freedom requires accepting impermanence without bitterness. Another layer of mastery emerges when you stop seeking emotional resolution through external victory. Many people believe peace will come once they are proven right. Once apologies are given, once recognition arrives, once circumstances change. This belief postpones peace indefinitely. Stoicism dismantles this by teaching that peace is an internal condition, not a reward. Eastern wisdom echoes this by dissolving the illusion of arrival. There is no final emotional victory that secures permanent calm. Calm is maintained, not achieved. Emotional mastery is not an endpoint, it is a mode of engagement. When you stop waiting for the world to fix your inner state, you stop being hostage to delay. Delay is the mind's favorite defense against responsibility. "I'll be calm when" is a promise that is rarely fulfilled. Mastery begins with, "I choose calm now." This choice does not deny difficulty, it denies domination by difficulty. Another subtle form of emotional bondage is the need to explain yourself. People exhaust themselves trying to be understood by those unwilling or incapable of understanding. Explanation becomes negotiation. Negotiation becomes self-betrayal. Stoicism advises restraint in self-justification because excessive explanation signals insecurity. Eastern wisdom teaches that truth does not need defense. Emotional mastery includes knowing when silence preserves dignity better than argument. You do not need to clarify your soul to every passerby. Privacy is not secrecy, it is containment. A contained life is harder to destabilize. This containment also applies to ambition. Many people confuse emotional mastery with passivity. But the opposite is true. A regulated mind is capable of sustained effort. Reactivity burns energy quickly. Calm channels it efficiently. Stoicism valued disciplined action. Eastern philosophy valued effortless action aligned with reality. Both rejected frantic striving. Emotional mastery allows you to pursue goals without being emotionally consumed by them. You act without desperation. You adapt without collapse. You accept feedback without identity erosion. This creates resilience. Resilience is not toughness, it is recoverability. A resilient mind returns to equilibrium faster. It does not avoid disturbance, it moves through it with less damage. Over time, this changes your baseline. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once provoked anger now triggers curiosity or indifference. This is not because you care less, it is because you are clearer. Clarity reduces friction. Friction generates heat. Heat fuels emotional exhaustion. When friction decreases, energy returns. Another dimension of mastery is recognizing when to disengage. Not every battle deserves participation. Not every relationship deserves access. Not every thought deserves attention. Selectivity is strength. The Stoics practiced voluntary withdrawal from unnecessary stimulation. Eastern traditions practiced withdrawal into stillness. Both recognized that constant engagement fragments the mind. Fragmentation leads to fatigue. Fatigue lowers emotional tolerance. Lower tolerance increases reactivity. The cycle repeats. Emotional mastery interrupts this cycle by simplifying attention. You guard what enters your mind. You choose what stays. This does not make you detached from life. It makes you present for what matters. Presence is impossible when attention is scattered. The modern world profits from your distraction. Emotional mastery is an act of resistance. It reclaims sovereignty over attention. Attention determines experience. Experience shapes perception. Perception drives emotion. Control attention, and emotion follows. This is not theoretical, it is practical. Finally, emotional mastery converges on humility. Not humiliation, but humility. The recognition that you are not the center of events. Not entitled to comfort. Not owed fairness. Not immune to loss. This humility is liberating. It removes the burden of constant expectation. It aligns you with reality rather than against it. When you stop demanding special exemption from the human condition, resentment dissolves. You suffer less not because life is kinder, but because you are less resistant. Stoicism and Eastern wisdom agree on this without contradiction. Acceptance is power. Acceptance does not mean resignation, it means accuracy. You see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. From accuracy comes effective action. From effective action comes confidence. From confidence comes calm. Emotional mastery is the quiet confidence that you can meet life as it is without losing yourself. It is not emotional numbness. It is emotional maturity. It is not detachment from humanity. It is detachment from illusion. The world will continue to provoke, disappoint, and challenge you. That is not a failure of philosophy. It is the condition philosophy was built to address. The question is no longer whether chaos will appear. The question is whether chaos will find permission inside you. Mastery is the refusal to grant that permission. Again and again, day after day, not because you are unfeeling, but because you are awake.